Senator Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, Gurmageth, thank you, Ms Buckley and Mr Cusson and your teams for giving of your time today. It's precious. We really appreciate and value the work that you all do on a daily basis. You know, the objective here is to ensure that we have a planning process that is consistent, is clear, and people can have confidence in. So I suppose in terms of your opening statements today and the discussion so far, I apologise for not having been physically present. I was watching online and co-locating as well in the Shannon chamber, so apologies for that. But the bits and pieces that I had picked up, just in terms of this funding question, because I know it's been a resourcing for both of your organisations, can you just clarify for me, have either of your two organisations been refused funding for resources? Have you got a funding, requests for funding that are refused or haven't been met?
We completed a strategic workforce plan last year, and given that we're a national body, we're trying to keep an overview of 31 local authority development plans, 200 or so other statutory plans, reviewing the planning functions of all the planning authorities and the board, undertaking research. We formed a view that our current complement, approved complement of 31 full-time equivalents was going to be very challenged in terms of discharging that function on an ongoing basis. And that a very significant increase in that would be required really to make the organisation sustainable, particularly bearing in mind normal turnover of staff, sick leave. You know, if you're an organisation of 31 people and 3 people don't turn up on a given day because, you know, all of life, that's 10%. If 6 people aren't available, that's 20%, and you're starting to really feel the pain. So we are currently in the process of recruiting an additional 9 roles out of approximately 30 we sought in total. So we are in a process of engagement with the department. I have to say, Senator, I have found the department actually quite responsive and good in relation to ensuring that our staffing and resourcing needs are met. Obviously, the department has to engage within the context of wider public sector numbers. There are lots of demands and so on, and we recognise that. But you know, we would see obviously the implementation in full of our workforce plan as being absolutely a de minimis position to actually discharge our function as the overseer of the Irish planning system.
Ms Buckley.
So obviously this predates me to a certain degree. We put in a strategic workforce plan last year, and I think the global amount sought was 59. There would, as always is the case, a fairly stringent approach towards whether the business case was met and so forth. We received sanction for 33 and received an initial sanction which allowed us to start the process, which is about to complete, for Director of Marine Planning. We received sanction for 33 then globally in December, about the 18th of December. So that allowed us to start the process of recruiting from January, and we do our own recruitment, which is useful, but obviously there's always a time lag. We are going to go back on the remaining 59, but actually my personal view, having been in the board for some weeks now, but it's a very preliminary view, is that we're going to have to go further. And I would expect probably over the course of the next year to 18 months, the board is going to have to be 50% more than it currently is, which we're about 200 at the moment. Which brings its own challenges. The walls of the building aren't made of rubber, so you know there's going to be issues around that. And as has been mentioned, the key area of the decision makers, the people who will become the commissioners but are currently called ordinary board members, those need to be recruited, and speaking to the Deputy Gould about that. And it may be something that we need to discuss with the department. Is 15 going to be sufficient to deal with the backlog, or do we need to go a little bit further and then to pull it back in naturally over time? So those are the kind of discussions that haven't yet taken place. We are going to go back in very shortly with a fresh business case for those remaining numbers we've already indicated that we need.
Okay, thank you. There was a lot of discussion as well around fines and penalties for potentially the board not meeting timelines, accepting your already statement that even with no backlog, the board doesn't always achieve 100%. Of its deadlines. But you mentioned that you consider that there would be other effective measures that could be taken to ensure the adherence to timelines. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, Deputy. I mean, I haven't fully worked this through, and certainly we haven't put any proposals to the department, but what essentially needs to be achieved is accountability for the management cadre of the organisation so that they are focused on delivery within the timelines, right? So the question is, what will achieve that accountability? And I'm not entirely clear that the organisation paying fines achieves that accountability. I think there may be other ways of holding people to account for what the efficiencies within their organisation and helping to drive that. So part of that is transparency around that. Part of that is needing to report to the department, to the Oireachtas, to this committee. Could well form a very important part of that is to be publicly accountable in effect for the delivery on those timelines. And to my mind, actually, that could make more of an impact in some respects within the legal constraints of which we can't have a system of default permission, for example, which used to be the old way in the planning system, but in the era of environmental impact assessment, all that's not possible, and certainly not possible for the board. So the question really is, what will bring it home to the leadership of the Planning Commission that they need to stick to those guidelines? There is that ethic within the local authorities because they've been doing it for donkey's years. So the question is, how do you bring that culture and that system into the board? I haven't fully elaborated in my head, but that's the way I'm thinking about it. And I'm not sure the organisation paying fines or returning part of its grant, for example, achieves that. That's part of it.
What we want to achieve is timely, consistent, timely decisions that are objectively arrived at and can be objectively defended. Can I ask you, have I time or do you?
Sure.
Yeah. Can I ask, just in terms of the timings then, and appreciating that it's not something that has yet been defined, the 18 weeks is out there. One expectation I think the general public will have, despite the 730 odd pages of the bill, is that this will streamline the process. It will actually standardise it, streamline it, and lead to efficiencies of process and practice. Is the public then incorrect to expect that there would be shorter, more efficient timelines? Is there any expectation of reducing the timelines? Or should the public be expecting that the timelines of 18 weeks were already unrealistic and the proposal will be to extend them? Mr. Cousins maybe, and then Ms. Buckley. Have we time? Sure.
Well, I'll leave Ms. Buckley deal with, I suppose, the consideration of timelines, particularly in relation to the board's context. But we have proven in the planning service in the past that when the resources are available and when the systems are clear, and there are a lot of very, very helpful streamlinings of the planning system, particularly in relation to judicial review. There's timelines laid out because, judicial review was an area where there weren't really very strict timelines. Planning authorities at local authority level, the board obviously had to work within very, very tight timeframes. And then if you had judicial review, subject to the courts and their mechanisms which we respect. But now that's much more clear. So that's one big, if you like, gain that the public will get. So we know where the various different stages will unfold if planning issues go that far. So I think, if we can get clarity in relation to the resources piece and I suppose how that's implemented at the different authority and agency level, maybe we can have, clearer performance regimes. Ms. Buckley has talked a little bit about that in relation to options that might be there in the board's context. But where we have clear plans, where we have a clear legal process around making planning decisions and so on, and we back those systems up with the people and the arrangements on the ground, then the public, yes, can expect a good performance. 30,000 decisions are made by planning authorities every year. The vast majority of those by the local authorities and pretty much within statutory timeframes. Yeah. So, I suppose, again, in our planning overview report, which we published recently, we highlighted that. Because I suppose it's a story that very often isn't told to the public. Yeah. And indeed, that the vast majority of those applications that are handled by planning authorities are approved. In some cases, in local authorities to the tune of 80-90%. Yeah. So, you know, I suppose insofar as there have been very, very well flagged, you know, challenges and issues in the planning process, they are but a very small part of a wider, if you like, day-to-day operation of the planning process that undergoes and is discharged without a great degree of drama,
Absolutely.
you know. But I have to say, and on the basis of the work that Gary and his team do on the review side, on the back of a very, very hard-pressed, if you like, cohort of planning authority staff and elected members and so on in the various different local authorities. And there's probably only so much more time that we can, if you like, call on that extraordinary effort before, you know, we have issues around burnout and so on, which are manifesting.
Ms. Buckley?
So what I would say is that there is a limit to how short we can make the system if we want to get quality decisions. So I have run big operational areas outside the planning system. And you know what's really quick? A bad no. Whereas a decent yes takes time. And there is an actual physical limit on how quickly people can process these increasingly complex files. Like the physical, you should see the size of the files that
Yeah, I have.
trundle past my door every day. It's extraordinary. So I would say to you, Senator, that what people want is certainty about timeframes. They don't necessarily want bad no's. And that if the trade-off is between quality and a certain time frame that might be a bit longer than people might like to have their decision yesterday, but if they know they're going to get their decision in 18 weeks or 26 weeks or a year, whatever, but know they're going to get their decision, well, so be it, as long as I get a decent decision that I know won't be challenged in judicial review, or if it is, will be upheld in a judicial review. And that's the important thing that we need to aim for. So I would say, in my view, I would say we can't go shorter than 18 weeks on anything, really, to be honest with you. Now, within that, but remember, that's the limit. That's not the target. So, for example, of that 18 weeks at the moment in normal planning appeals, 5 weeks of that at the moment is processing, right? Because we're processing paper files, we're sending letters to local authorities, we're getting them back. E-planning is on its way. The local authorities are into that space, and An Bord Pleanála will have to come into that. That'll shave time off that, you know, automatically, because there'll be much more automation around it. So I would say that, but then that might mean we need to take a little bit more. We currently have 9 weeks in normal planning fields for planners. This is with no backlog and fully resourced and all that other good stuff. So maybe that means the planners get to take 11 weeks and have a bit of a longer, slightly longer go. And maybe that means the board itself, or the commission as it will be, gets maybe 5 weeks. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
okay.
But if you want decent decisions, what I know from running other systems, you can have drive-by decisions, as I call them, but they won't last, and they're no good, and nobody wants them. So what we need is to have the time to take proper decisions.
Cormac.
Okay.